And Steve, welcome to New Tracks again, 3 weeks in a row. Thank you for letting me twist your arm. And I want to point out that's a new countertop he has there in front of him.
Yeah, yes. Once a year we get a nice fresh top. Well, good evening, everybody. And tonight, as a follow-up to that nice program we just had with USA Trains, I will say that at my personal railroad, I think I have more USA Trains locomotives than any other brand. So I've been a big investor. I should have bought stock in their company years ago, I guess. Been a good investment. But anyway, one thing I want to talk about here briefly tonight before I start showing you the models is that a lot of people ask me still, how do I decide which locomotives I'm going to tackle building? And most of that is the fact that I try to build those that will fit into my scheme, which is late 1960s diesels. And I also build those that are survivors. These are the real engines from many, many years ago that are still out there either working or they're in museums. But in any case, the real locomotives still exist. And in many cases, the manufacturers have not produced that particular locomotive. And I realize it is not possible for manufacturers to make every possible locomotive, particularly in things like large scale. Your limitations would be there. The cost for tooling and so forth would just be prohibitive to try to make every possible thing out there. I just happened to be working on an article for one of the publishing companies regarding the same topic about how I approach this. So that'll be coming out probably next year. And I made a list of what we do. I have some other helpers that go with me when we want to produce what I think is the next locomotive that I want to build. And that all starts with research, number one. 2 weeks ago, I spent a full day at the Western Maryland Historical Society going through their records with the help of their staff for an upcoming project. And that's one of the best starting points. My next one is, once I get that information behind me, generally I call the railroad or the museum that owns that particular model and say, hey, I build scale models of locomotives, and you have the one at your place that I'd like to build. And by the way, how about letting us guys come there and crawl over your piece of equipment so we can measure it and photograph it and do all these things. You get a really kind of wide variety of responses depending on who you talk to at these railroads, but they've all been very agreeable. It's amazing. They're like, yes, you can come over, but you know, there's insurance requirements and so forth, and you fellas have to be careful. I said, well, I'll tell you what, I grew up on the railroad, I worked on the railroad, and I understand exactly what you're talking about. So we've never had any incidents of issues being on their property and doing what we want to do. Once we get photographs, all that technical data and so forth, I bring it back. One of the fellows who happens to work with me is a professional artist, worked for National Geographic for many years. We sat down and sketch out what we're going to do, get the particular pieces of every locomotive kind of in sections. We do front views, side views, etc. It is almost impossible to find photographs of the tops of locomotives. Very few times are locomotives ever filmed or photos taken of the very top of the chassis. So that's one of the things. We put ladders up, get up on top of those locomotives, get the measurements, and transfer all that onto our drawings. And once that's all done, now the next process is going to be, what do you build it from? Do you start from maybe some existing product that's out there that you can modify, or you just start from scratch? So since we just had a presentation with USA Trains, the first one I'm going to show you is a locomotive that I'm very familiar with. My mother worked for Western Maryland Railroad for 35 years. I worked with them as a car inspector many years ago, and I'm very familiar with this locomotive. I spent time riding in it up in the cab. It's had various owners over the years, and currently it's just been sold again, and it's now going to be going to the Western Maryland Scenic Railroad in Cumberland, Maryland. I'm going to slide this one forward and get Steve, the other Steve, to let you see this locomotive. This locomotive, in 1962, went to Hagerstown, Maryland, to the shops and got what was called a chopped nose. This was to improve crew visibility out the front of locomotives that had high noses. So the number 25 was the very first one done. It's unique in the sense if I spin it around, it was the only one done that has dual windshields up here in the front. Actually, to build this model, we chopped up a GP38, and those are the windows from a GP38, and they just about absolutely mirror the ones that Western Maryland used. The chop job on the engine, I bought this used, and this was a Santa Fe, USA Train Santa Fe unit in the war bonnet scheme. So it took it, we stripped it down, gutted it out on the inside because this happens to be a battery powered unit and it runs on an air wire system. We're using USA Trains as power trucks underneath of here. The detail parts that we've changed on the front and on the rear, these parts have come from USA Trains as well. It has full sound inside. Back in '62, after these things were chopped, some of them got new paint jobs. This particular one was repainted later in CSX. It was then sold to a railroad, a short line in Georgia. They kept it in the CSX colors. After that, a gentleman by the name of George Altizer, who owned the Georges Creek Railway, purchased this and it went to Georges Creek. Up into Georges Creek, I actually got a hold of Gerald and we went up there and ran this locomotive and made a whole series of videos that we were going to produce. Unfortunately, we had an incident with that material. It got lost in the shuffle, but the actual locomotive itself, this number 25 and another one, the number 39, were just purchased by the Western Maryland Scenic. And that's great because I think they're going to have their shop crew go over this locomotive and put it right back in working condition. And I guess they plan to use it in scenic operations up there. I'm going to turn it on here just briefly. This is equipped with sound. Hopefully you can hear it.
Not really.
I won't go through all the various sounds. It has there's crew talk in the background. It just came on there briefly. But these are excellent models. So I don't have to speak over the top of this thing. One thing about G-Scan, you go outside, you got to turn the volume up because you lose volume. Since my railroad is indoors and out, we actually have what we call indoor sound or outdoor sound. When you come indoors, you got to turn the sound down. It gets a bit overriding. But I will say that this engine, which now has, I have to ask somebody at USA Trains when they first started producing these, but I'm going to say we have about 12 to 15 years of operation on the railroad with these, and the power trucks have held up great, have had no problems whatsoever. And this is an engine that we run regularly on the layout. A trip around my layout is a point to point. It takes about 8 minutes end to end with cars. So these things get lots of run time when we're actually running. We're having operating sessions out on the railroad. So that's one of the locomotives. I'm going to slip away from that one for a second and tell you that when I decided to start doing these models, I didn't start with a big engine like that. I started with this little fellow right here. This product is from Pico. They introduced this one a while back. This is a little 25 tonner that it's not done in 1/32 scale, which they usually do. This is done in 1/24. This one has been a pretty successful little engine because it's small. A lot of people can use it on a small layout. You don't have to have a large place to run them. About the only disadvantage for them, they're limited to about 2 to 3 cars, full-size freight cars that they can handle. This particular one is a track-powered model. They supplied me with about half a dozen of these for prototype paint jobs. Pico does not offer it in this Western Maryland scheme. I did this one and I did a CSX and a few others, and they never did really put these in production. So this is just a pre-production sample, I guess you would say. The only changes have been made from them. This is had on the front end, KD coupler installation here, and the same way on the rear. The product that you see here was next introduced as a battery unit. Track cleaning unit was offered, followed by just a straight battery unit. They are putting batteries by opening this front, putting their batteries in this long nose. This one has been changed up, and the next one I'm going to show you, this version still has the contacts on the bottom to be track powered. I don't have a track powered layout. This just sits on my shelf as a shelf model, but I thought that I could improve on this product by increasing its tractive effort. In other words, getting more pulling power, because the power blocks themselves are really strong. They're no problem there whatsoever. So I'll show, there's the Pico product. The next one we're going to show you is a new version that I produced. This is a 25 tonner. This is a 35 tonner. So what you have seen here is, I know you'll think I'm crazy, but I took the power block here out of this. I put it on my table saw and pushed it through the table saw and cut the front and rear end off the power block. I then took a scrap USA Trains engine I had sitting here that we chopped the running boards and so forth off the front and rear of it and mated it onto the front and back of the Pico engine. We also raised the body upward. It's much taller than the other one. This one has a side entry door for the crew. We now have this entry door here on the rear. Change the side windows so that it's a different setup all the way around. Top received a vent roof hatch, an extended smokestack. These railings are just handcrafted from brass, created those for those. And this nose now contains a lithium battery that is rechargeable with a port here on the bottom to recharge it. We have a separate switch. This is our sound switch on this side and battery charge. And it'll come on here in a second. And on this side, we have headlight, front and rear power. So actually you can set with its lights on, just like that. You don't have to have it operating, can be in that position. This one has a different sound setup in it. This has a little MRC system that's inside of it. These MRC systems, pretty handy. Right here's one. And for a little switcher like this, these are great. If I turn that back on one more time. Oh, that's charge position. I must say I have to give Steve Cheryl and Clem the idea to do these. Pretty handy dandy little setup. And if you notice that front and back motion, that's because it has a momentum shuttle gear built into that one. So that's a product that I thought could be put into production. I still think they can. The power blocks that were produced for this were actually made with the idea that they were going to do a 2-truck locomotive. They haven't gotten that far with their American products yet, but hopefully this will do. This little engine I showed you first, the 2 to 3 car operation, we had this out on a test on a gentleman that has a 4% grade in his railroad. This pulled 10 cars up a 4% grade. One of the big reasons is on the bottom, it has traction tires on every single axle. Secondly, we have filled this entire interior in here with lead weights. So the tractive effort is much higher than it was before. And the traction tires really give you excellent traction onto there. These little locomotives are made for a number of years. They were one of the most successful locomotives ever produced up through 1974. 550 some units of that particular locomotive were made. The last engine I'm going to show you, I will show you how it started, and I'll let you all, make you guess what it is. This is a diesel locomotive. This is the frame. This is how I start them when I build them. And what we're looking at here is just a piece of 3/16 flat steel. The blue line represents the actual outline of the frame. This is the same size as a GP7, GP9. These squares you see here and here, we cut those out with a torch. That's where the motor blocks rise up through. The round circle you see here is for the speaker. With this, this is the beginning point when I build a locomotive, if I'm building truly from scratch. After that point, I do one of two things. One, if I'm really desperate, I just start with styrene, PVC, and so forth, and start molding out the body. If I can find other locomotives that have some of the components I need, I chop them up and I use some of those components in the process. But I think a lot of people are amazed that this is what is the bottom frame for a lot of my equipment. This actually works out pretty good. This is going to give you 11 pounds of weight, this steel plate, about 11 to 12 pounds of weight, before we add anything on top of it. Finished locomotive is going to be 15 to 16 pounds in that category. So if you haven't figured out what engine I'm building here, right, I will show you what engine it is. There it is, finished. Right. This is the same steel this thing was built upon. The power trucks underneath are from USA Trains, their power trucks. The rest of this I built from styrene, Bondo, and PVC, brass railings, bent and shaped for the locomotive. The BL-2, just a little history, EMD brought this thing out prior to the production of the GP7 and eventually the GP9. This was called BL for branch line service. They envisioned these would be single engine going out on locals. When I worked on Western Maryland, we had these in Hagerstown. They were used as hump engines, humping cars up there. They also produced a slug unit, which I've also built. I don't have it up here tonight. So they used this along with a slug. And that was the work that these engines did for many, many years. Once again, this engine and the number 81, which is at the B&O Museum in Baltimore, 82 is working every day on the Durban and Greenbrier Railroad, and right here in West Virginia, down in Elkins. John Smith, who owns the railroad down there, he's had me up in the cab of this thing frequently. I also rode this thing many years ago when I was on the South Branch Valley before they gave up on it and sold it to him. So I've had a couple of times to be up in this locomotive. It's a very unusual cab inside. You really have a kind of spooky feeling, kind of like a Halloween-y look on the curvature of those windows up front. They are really different look, a little bit of an F unit look, but they really aren't. I know some people are going to tell me it's the ugliest engine ever made because they don't like them, but they kind of fall in love with them. This interior on this one, and I'll kick this one on for a second. This one has a Phoenix sound system in it, and we're using, once again, the air wire. This one has a really high amount of programming. Interior wise, the lighting on all of these is LED lighting. The old, I guess, incandescent type bulbs before that, if we get engines like that, I take those back out. We go the whole LED process through all these engines. This engine there, I tell you, with the slug behind it, I believe it would pull my pickup truck out of the driveway with no problem. It is really a powerful unit. You got four trucks, and every one of those pulling. It is quite impressive to do so. This engine, when we got it completed, I contacted the director to be in a museum, and they wanted to see it because I had built a previous piece of equipment that they have down there. So we took it to Baltimore, and they have an outdoor G-scale layout there. So this engine, even though they have the number 81 down there, it's under restoration right now. This engine actually ran the layout at the museum here last February, and they were all excited to see a model this size to have operating there. So that's it, 3 different products. And
What about the fans on top of this one?
the fans on this?
Mhm.
What about it? Mr. Sherrill asked me a question.
Tip it up so I can get the fans. Are those fans working, Steve?
Driven, as far as driven?
Yeah.
No, we don't have those driving. Yeah, it's not that.
Well, you made those fans scratch, didn't you?
No, these are USA Trains as fans here.
Okay.
These over here are 3D printed on this one. They're just a slightly different fan, but this is a 3D product. These are from USA Trains. That's their actual fan units up on top of there. I guess I'm still old school. I haven't learned how to do the 3D printing, but I do have 2 fellows that print us parts, especially small detail parts as we need them. So that comes in real handy. But for example, people ask me, and I tell them, this headlight you see in cover, I have a company that makes watch crystal faces. This is the face off of a watch, is what these are. And they work perfect into there. We 3D printed the little trim and ring that goes around that piece. But if you search out there long enough, you'll find the parts that you need.
Well, that's just amazing work, Steve, and very entertaining segment this evening. I am just amazed at the craftsmanship. The level of modeling is just excellent. It's just amazing what you do, and I had the privilege, of course, being in your workshop, seeing these models firsthand, and I have to say that BL unit's growing on me.
I told Steve Sherrill while we were here, I said, this is my version of a my build.
It's a my science project. Just
Yeah.
excellent work, and thank you for the evening, and very interesting program. Very great segment. Thank you.
You're right. Okay, well, 3 weeks of me and G-Scale, you guys are probably worn out with me now for a while.
No, when your layout gets rocking and rolling this spring, I think we'll have to have a feature of the outdoor layout. That would be very interesting. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And